The Backpack 10. Marty had taken a long, hot shower and was sitting on the floor of his bedroom, tying on a pair of dry sneakers. Grace was sitting on his bed. "Did you really think the dolphins were sharks?" she asked. "I sure did. I'm happy to have feet to put into these shoes. For a while there, I thought they were at the bottom of the lake, going for a run without me. I take it that you still want to go to the Congo." "Duh, Dujor," Marty answered, meaning duh of the day, one of his and Luther's favorite sayings. He stood and looked out the window. "I have to admit that when I was in the middle of the lake, being torn apart by sharks, there were a few seconds when even Omega Prep was looking pretty good. But now that I'm whole again..." He walked over to the suitcase and found a t-shirt. "I doubt Wolf is going to take us to the Congo now. I really blew it." Grace was just thinking how she had blown it by fainting when Marty needed her most, and she also felt terrible for not trying harder to stop him from leaving. But what she felt even more guilty about was her first thought upon believing he had drowned. "How did Wolf lose his leg?" Marty asked. "He wouldn't say," Grace answered. "Wolf was waiting for them in the library. He had a fire burning in the fireplace and a thermos of hot chocolate on the table in front of the sofa. Sitting next to the thermos was a small backpack and a miniature camp stove with a bottle of fuel. The twins stared at the objects in numbed silence. The backpack and camp stove had belonged to their father. "Where did you get them?" Grace whispered. "In the Amazon," Wolf said, "at the crash site. I flew there as soon as I heard about it. I just got back yesterday." "You've been looking for them for 6 months?" Marty asked. Wolf nodded. "I know it may not seem like it, but my sister and I were very close, and Timothy was a good friend." He took a deep breath. "I'm afraid the pack is as close as I've come to finding them." Marty had intended to march into the library and start right in on his Congo campaign, but he hadn't expected this. He brushed his fingers across the faded blue fabric of the backpack. His father had carried his notebooks and tape recorder in it, as well as the little camp stove, which he used to brew coffee. He couldn't remember a time his father didn't have it with him. The bag was empty except for the camp stove and your father's journal, which was all but ruined. Into this. He reached into the pack and pulled out the Mother's Day card they had sent. Paper-clipped to it was a sketch Marty had drawn of himself and Grace walking along a beach, holding their mother's hands. The twins stared at the card and were nearly overcome with sadness. "I haven't given up on finding your parents," Rolf said. "I hope people down there looking right now. And they'll continue the search until every lead, however small, has been exhausted. I'm in constant touch with them. If your parents are alive, we'll find them." "Do you think they're alive?" Grace asked. "To be honest," Wolf answered quietly, "I don't know. 6 months is a long time. But they must have survived the crash or we would have found their bodies at the site. They either wandered off on their own, or else they were injured and someone came along and moved them. There's a number of uncontacted tribes in the area. They might be in one of their camps recuperating. I spent most of my life looking for things people don't believe exists, and I've had a pretty good success rate. The only reason I came back was because of you, and to take care of some pressing business. He looks them both in the eye. I haven't given up on finding them, and I don't want you to give up either. We won't, they said in unison, feeling better about their parents' disappearance than they had in months. Good, Wolf took a deep breath. I know you both have a lot of questions for me, but let's clear up this Congo thing first. I think you should take us with you, Grace said. Marty stared at his sister in amazement. He had never liked her more than at that moment. Grace was equally surprised. Until she blurted this out, she had wanted to return to school. Perhaps nearly losing Marty had changed her. Perhaps she was finally ready to confront some of her fears. I'm with Grace, Marty added quickly. I know my stunt at the lake this morning might have scared you a little, but I promise to follow your rules, to the letter from now on. It scared me a lot, Girl said, but your swim has nothing to do with my decision. I made up my mind last night. I can't take you to the Congo. Why not? Grace asked, with a mixture of disappointment and relief. First, you have more than a month of school left. My plan was to hire a tutor and have you finish up the year right here. Unfortunately, Laura and I have to get to the Congo right away. So there's no time for me to find a tutor. If I'd known about the egg, I would have waited and had you come after school was out. I'm afraid I'm going to have to send you back to Switzerland. Marty was dumbfounded. He had just about given up on Wolf taking them to the Congo, but he didn't think they would be sent back to the school. Grace was not at all surprised by Wolf's decision. He had said as much the day before in the library, but now that she had changed her mind, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. We'd learn a lot more in the Congo than we would at any school, she said. That's probably true, Wolf admitted. And you told Laurel that you were planning on taking us to Lake Tele eventually anyway, Grace argued. Why not get it over with? You were going to take us to Lake Tele? Marty asked, wondering what else Grace had neglected to tell him. Yes, I was, Roland said, and I promise I'll take you there one day, but not this trip. It's too dangerous. Marty was still confused. Why do you want to take us to Lake Tele? I'm afraid the answer is going to have to wait until I get back. It's complicated. Why can't we just stay on Cryptos? Marty asked. Everyone here has at least 2 full-time jobs, and there will be no one to watch after you. We don't need babysitters, Marty protested. I'm sure you don't, but I'll feel a lot better knowing you're at the school where it's safe. I've already contacted Dr. Beazle, and he's looking forward to your return. I bet he is, Marty said. I know this is disappointing, but I promise I'll make it up to you. When I get back, we'll start all over again. Wolf stood up. Here's my new plan. We have a jet of sorts. Phyllis will fly Laurel and me to the Congo. then fly up to Switzerland and drop you and Grace off. When we finish at Lake Tele, we'll pick you up and take you back to Cryptos. What if school isn't out yet? He asked. I'll take you back to Cryptos anyway, and that will be the last you'll ever see of that or any other boarding school again. Preparations 11. Grace and Marty saw very little of each other over the next few days. Marty spent his time exploring the island and doing his best to wear down every member of Wolf's merry band of pirates. He left the house at dawn and returned well after dark, determined to see every nook and cranny on Cryptos and to learn everything he could about Wolf's operation before he was sent back to school. One of the things he learned was that his uncle operated on a shoestring budget. Almost all the money E-Wolf had made was put back into the company for research and development. This left little ready cash for cryptid research, or to fix things, like the engine on the jet Wolf was to take to the Congo. Marty was in the hangar when Phil, Wolf, and his two mechanics were discussing what to do about it. The engine's shot, one of the mechanics said. There has to be some way to fix it, Wolf insisted. You've never let me down before. There's always a first time, the other mechanic said. She needs a new engine. I can't afford a new engine, Wolf said. The mechanics shrugged and walked off. There were plenty of other broken things in the hangar for them to fix. What are you going to do? Phil asked. I have no idea. What about Ted? I bet he could come up with something. Wolf shook his head. I haven't even seen him since I got back to the island. He's sealed in his lab, working on something. You know how he is. Yeah, Phil said. He's weird. I have an idea, Marty offered, ignoring Wolf's and Phil's skeptical expressions. I'm sure Mom and Dad left Grace and me plenty of money. You're welcome to use my portion to buy an engine. That's the best offer I've had in a year, Wolf said, smiling for the first time in 2 days. They did leave you a good sum of money, but I put it into a trust fund until we find them, or until you're 21. I'm afraid it won't help us today. Even if we had the cash, Phil said, I doubt we'd be able to find an engine for her. She's a pretty old bird. Wolf explained to Marty that their expedition money came from contract work. They hired themselves out to conduct scientific surveys for universities and governments, and our next contract isn't until this summer. Until then, we have a slight cash flow problem. What else is new? Phil said. Where's the contract? Marty asked. New Zealand. Look, Phil, and I have to make some phone. Will Grace and I be going with you? Yes, we've been hired to help a research team to get a good look at a kraken. What's that? Giant squid, also known as Oxytiotus. Wolf and Phil started to walk away. Marty followed. Like the ones in the aquarium? No, those are a very common species. Over the years, a few giant squid have washed up on shore, but no one's ever been able to study a live specimen. Wow, New Zealand. Now, if you don't mind, Sure, Marty said. I'll just go poke around the island some more. The rule about not exploring the island alone had been forgotten almost immediately, as Marty hoped it would be. Everyone was too busy getting things ready for the Congo trip to pay much attention to what Marty was doing. Although Wolf did periodically check in with him on the gizmo to make sure he was okay. In fact, Marty had pestered everyone so much that one morning Phil gave him a helmet and a dented but serviceable four-wheeler. "Here's the deal," Phil said, before handing over the keys. "You have to spend at least 6 hours a day riding this thing, and I don't want you anywhere near the hangar when you're on it. You're a great kid, but we have a lot of work to do, and you're driving everyone crazy. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." Marty gave him a salute. "Then get out of here." "Did you figure out what to do about the jet?" "No. Now." "I'm out of here," Marty said. The only place Marty had not gained access to was the second Quonset hut, known as QAQ, the Question and Answer Quonset, which is where all the R&D research and development was done for E-Wolf. No one was allowed inside except Wolf, his partner Ted Bronson, and the half-dozen scientists that worked on Ted's research team. Marty had waylaid each member of the team on their way into the building in an attempt to take his way inside, or at least find out what they were doing in there. But they were a tight-lipped bunch with a very different look from the mechanics who worked in the jet Quonset, with grease under their nails and whisker stubble on their faces. The QAQ gang carried heavy briefcases, wore thick glasses, and were uniformly pale, as if they didn't get much sun. Ted Bronson actually lived inside the QAQ, and the rumor was that he had not stepped outside its doors in more than 3 years. When Marty asked Phil about the rumor, he said, "It's been longer than that." Grace spent her time in the library, but she was not reading books. Laurel was teaching her to walk the high wire. The library floor was covered with mattresses to soften her many falls. She had managed to make it across the thin wire at 6 inches, a foot, and a foot and a half. But at 2 feet high, she had yet to make it halfway across. She fell over and over again, but she didn't mind. Laura was teaching her a great deal more than how to balance on the thin wire. "My mother was born under the big top and loved every aspect of the circus life," Laura told her one day. "She tried her hand at acrobatics, the high wire, training bears. She was even shot out of a cannon a time or two. But her true love was the trapeze. I wish you could have seen her. When I was little, I thought she could actually fly, and wondered where she hid her wings when she was on the ground. But I learned that she didn't have wings." Laura paused. Her last performance went flawlessly until the finale. A quadruple somersault, a very difficult feat, but one she had completed 1,000 times before. This time, though, The catcher was a fraction of a second late. When she came out of the fourth rotation, his hands weren't there. She fell. Wasn't there a net? Grace asked. Yes, but she only caught the very edge of it. It wasn't enough to stop her from hitting the ground. I'm so sorry. Laura gave her a wistful smile. She died doing what she loved and what she was born to do. My father never got over it. He changed his clown makeup from a smile to a sad frown. And when the grease paint was off, the sadness still remained. She was his life. It took me a long time to get over it, too. Before the fall, my parents had to watch me every second of the day. If they took their eyes off me, I would be out the trailer door, toddling beneath the elephants, or trying to pet the kitties, which were actually lions and tigers. Grace laughed. After the fall, I stayed in our trailer most of the time, refusing to leave. Laura continued. It was the only place I felt truly safe. If the ringmaster hadn't forced my father to put me on the wire, I don't know what would have happened to me. I think you would have been okay, Grace said. You started out bold, then changed, and became bold again. I would never have crawled under an elephant or tried to pet a lion. I've always been afraid of things. Even when you were little? Always. Laura gave her a thoughtful look. What's your earliest memory? That's easy. Marty climbing to the very top of my parents' floor-to-ceiling bookcase to get his bag of Halloween candy. It must have been 12 feet high. You were afraid he would fall? No, Grace said. I was afraid he would fall on me. Laura laughed. There's nothing wrong with a little fear. Being fearful can save your life. It saved mine on more than one occasion. But too much fear can stop you from living. She stepped onto the wire and began walking forward and backward. Just remember, it's all a matter of balance. One thing that helped me was to make a list of all my fears. I took them on one at a time. There are still a number of fears on that list, but it's gotten shorter over the years. How did you take them on? I simply visualized myself overcoming the fear. The great thing about the technique is that you can practice whenever you want and wherever you are. Laura closed her eyes as she walked the wire. Take deep breaths, relax, then confront the fear in the safety of your imagination. Remember what I taught you about gaze anchoring. Look at the wire in front of you, whether in your imagination as I'm doing now, or for real. Don't look down at your feet. Look beyond your fear at the goal. Try not to think about the steps. In the evenings, Grace worked on her fear list in her moleskin under the title Fears du Jour. The list was depressingly long, with a nightmare holding the number one spot. But how do you confront a fear you can't remember? She wanted to talk to Laurel about this, but didn't know how to broach the subject without looking foolish. Wolf was considering taking a commercial flight to the Congo and putting Marty and Grace on another flight back to Switzerland. We won't be able to bring much in the way of equipment, he told Laurel. And of course Bo and Vid will have to stay behind. But I don't know what else to do. We have to get to Lake Tele. If I don't tell her about the nightmare now, I might not get another chance, Grace thought. What if something happens to Lowell in the Congo? What if she decides to stay in the Congo? Her university job is gone. There's really nothing for her to come back to here. And what if Wolf breaks his word and leaves us at the boarding school? Grace didn't think he would, but she wasn't certain. She hardly knew the man, and every time she had seen him in the past few days, he was off in another world. The few times they had spoken it had been painfully awkward for him. He either glanced at his watch and said he had something important to attend to, or he passed her off to someone else like Bertha or Phil, and quickly disappeared. Laura Grace began. I've been meaning to ask you about... The library door burst open. It was Wolf. Ted Bronson came through for us, he said breathlessly. He and his crew spent the night fixing the engine. I thought you said it couldn't be fixed, Laurel said, still balancing on the wire. Ted's a genius. They manufactured new parts from old junk we had lying around the hangar. Will it be safe? We just tested it. It works better than the other engines. When are we leaving? Right now. He turned and left them without a word. About the mattresses on the floor, or his new anthropologist on the wire. Noah Blackwood stood in front of the nearly opened giant panda exhibit at his Seattle Ark. He was surrounded by a group of reporters, city officials, and wealthy patrons. I have a little surprise for you, he announced, then nodded at his curator. The curator spoke into his two-way radio, and a hydraulic door began to slowly open in the back of the exhibit. At first, nothing happened. Then a small black and white head appeared in the open doorway. There was a gasp from the crowd. A baby panda, someone shouted. The reporter's cameras started clicking and whirring. A moment later, a second head appeared, then a third. 3 little surprises, Blackwood said, with a smile as bright as the camera's strobes. They were born at my Bear's Ark 6 months ago. I thought the 2 pandas you had there were too old to reproduce, a reporter said. We thought so too, Blackwood agreed. But I guess the special diet I developed revitalized them. Aren't triplets rare? Unheard of until now. None of this was true. The 3 cubs had been flown in directly from China 2 weeks earlier. Blackwood had sent Butch McCall, his right-hand man, over there with enough cash to hire a poacher, and together they stole the 3 cubs from 3 different mothers. The money Blackwood had paid was nothing compared to the money he would make from the lines of people flocking to the Ark to see the black and white miracles. Why didn't you tell anyone about the birth before this? The mother refused to raise her cubs, so I hand-raised them myself, Blackwood answered smoothly. I kept it quiet to reduce the cubs' stress levels. I felt that their survival far outweighed any need for publicity. His cell phone rang. Excuse me, he stepped away from the crowd to answer it. Wolf has left the island, a man said. How? In his jet. You told me the engines was beyond repair. Yeah, the man said, but not beyond Ted Bronson's brain. Blackwood shook his head in disgust. Who's on the airplane? His crew, the kids, and... The man hesitated. Dr. Lee. Blackwood swore, a little too loudly, and several heads turned in his direction. He smiled them away, and hissed into the phone. When did she get to the island? A few days ago. I didn't even know she was here. She's been up in the house most of the time. Where are they going? According to their flight plan, the Congo. Then up to Switzerland. Wolf and Dr. Lee are going to the Congo, and the kids are being taken back to their school. Blackwood swore again, then hung up, and made another phone call. When he finished, he walked back over to the reporters. I can take a small group of you into the exhibit for some close-ups if you like. The Flight 12. Subject: Give me a break, from Luther Smith at xlinks.com to Marty at ewolf.com. Marty, first of all, you're a liar. Crypto's Island? My butt. You had me going there for a minute. But when I read about the chimp you thought was a Bigfoot, I know you were putting me on. I printed your email and handed it around to the other guys. Unfortunately, it fell into the hands of the head nose picker himself, aka Dr. Weasel. He called me into his office and told me to quit circulating this ridiculous fiction, or he would take my email privileges away. He still hasn't discovered our secret computer. The comic money is piling up, and we should have enough to go to press soon. I think he's afraid we'll steal a boat and sail off to Crypto's, leaving a lot of empty dorm rooms and no tuition to pay for the upkeep of the school, and more important, the Weasel's salary. It really bugs him that his number one hooligan, aka you, is still disrupting things from thousands of miles away. Speaking of bugs, they fumigated the school a couple of days ago for termites, and we got a whole day off, just as you predicted. You should have seen the Weasel's face when he heard you were coming back. Which reminds me, I have some good news. The annual field trip to Tita's dairy farm is in a few days. The NP nearly cancelled it in your honor, but the faculty talked him out of it. They assured him that there would be no bowl this year. Luther. P.S. Is your uncle serious about flying your friends to Cryptos whenever you want? Marty answered Luther's email from a seat aboard his uncle's private jet. Subject 3. Give me a break. From Marty at ewolf.com to Luther Smith at xlinks.com. Luther. I'll be careful what I say here, just in case this falls into the boogered hands of the head NP himself. As far as I know, Wolf, my uncle, was very serious about flying our friends out to Cryptos. He has his own jet. It's a surplus Air Force bomber. He's refitted it as a transport. He keeps the jet in a gigantic hangar on Cryptos, and there's a runway long enough for a space shuttle to land on. The island was a secret military base during World War II. Wolf got it in exchange for some work he did for the government. I'd tell you what it was, but then I'd have to kill you. Just kidding. Everyone here is very tight-lipped about what the work was. I was telling you about Bertha and Phil Bishop. Well, I found out today that they're both ex-military. Phil was a colonel in the Air Force, and Bertha was an Army general. I'm not kidding. According to Phil, she was in the Rangers and knows 106 ways to kill a man with her bare hands. One thing for sure, I won't be complaining about her cooking when we get back to the island this summer. She stayed on the Cryptos, but Phil is along with us, helping his daughter Phyllis, aka Phil Jr., fly the airplane. Phyllis is Wolf's chief pilot, and she was in the Air Force too. In addition to us humans, we have with us the chimp you thought I was lying about, a raven named Vid, and the bucket dog who is just along for the ride. Grace and I have been put in charge of taking care of them. Wolf has enough supplies on board to last him for years, including a Humvee which he's using to get to Lake Tele. The jet isn't exactly first class. In fact, it's more like a flying school bus with bunk beds, but it seemed to fly okay. Up by the cockpit is the communication room. It's manned by a half-dozen geeks. They sit in this dark room with their eyes glued to color monitors. I'm not sure what they're monitoring. I've popped in a couple of times and asked them what they're doing. But so far, they've given me the boot. Speaking of which, there's a second Cronset on the island that is so top secret they won't even let me inside. I know you're laughing right now, thinking I'm lying. So I've attached a digital photo of me in the cockpit with Phyllis and her dad. Also, I've attached a rough map of Cryptos, what I've seen of it anyway. I climbed up to the top of the inactive volcano on the west side of the island and discovered that you can get down into that crater. I didn't have time to go very deep, but when I get back to Cryptos, I'm going to see where it leads. Check out the map. And wait until you see the gizmo. I thought I wrecked it when I went for my swim, but it's completely waterproof. How cool is that? I'm going to head up to the cockpit and see if they need a hand flying this monster. I'll see you back at the cell after I land. Marty. P.S. Looking forward to renewing old acquaintances at Tita's diary. P.P.S. Wanna go deep sea fishing in New Zealand this summer? Marty closed the gizmo and buttoned it in his shirt pocket. When he got to the cockpit, he was surprised to see Wolf in the pilot seat instead of Phyllis. I didn't know you were a pilot. I'm not nearly as good as Phyllis, Wolf said, or her dad. Don't believe him, Phil said from the co-pilot's seat. Your uncle's an ace. Marty laughed and turned to Phyllis. He was sitting behind them, typing commands into the navigation computer. We are going to make a supply drop at Lake Tele before we land at the airport, she explained. It'll save Wolf and Laurel from having to haul everything in on their backs. Supply drops aren't like that. They aren't like they used to be when I was in command, Phil said. Phyllis rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Dad, not again. I'm serious, Phil insisted. It's all automatic now. The computer calculates the airspeed, the size of the chute, altitude, wind speed, and direction. Target. All of it. You don't even get to push the button anymore. Phyllis grinned, then tapped Wolf on the shoulder. Everything's set. It's nap time for me. Think you can handle the controls for a while? No problem, Wolf said. If Dad starts getting on your nerves, just hit the eject button. I heard that, Phil said. How are the animals? Wolf asked Marty. The last time I checked, they were okay, but Bo is a little jumpy. She doesn't like being in the cage, Wolf said, and I don't blame her. We'll make it up to her when we get to Lake Tele. Marty stayed for a while, then wandered down to the galley to make something to eat. This airplane feels as if it's going to shake itself apart. My cursive looks like it was written with a palsied hand. And every time I try to talk to Laurel, she's with someone. We'll be to the Congo soon, and I'll have missed my opportunity. I should have talked to her back on Cryptos when I had a chance. Back to Fear the Jaw. 99. Spiders. With their 8 spindly legs, their webs sticking to your face and hair, fangs that desiccated insects, bundling the dead in cocoons for lean days. 100. Broken bones, especially in my left hand, the one I write with, the one I'll do surgery with when I become a doctor. 101. Escalators. Being pushed down one from behind, or someone being sucked down with the bottom step as it disappears into the floor. I'm not sure what good this is doing me. 102. Smothering. I might want to move this one a little higher on the list. Maybe as high as... Marty found Grace sitting at the conference table, scribbling in her moleskin, with PD on her lap. She was wearing her school uniform. Marty was wearing a pair of cargo pants Wolf had found for him, an old baggy shirt, and his baseball cap. He didn't want to disappoint Dr. Weasel when he arrived in Switzerland. You writing a novel? He asked. Just trying to work some things out, Grace answered vaguely without looking up. This meant she might be working on a quantum physics problem, or venting her frustration at something annoying someone had said to her. Probably me, Marty thought. What volume are you working on? This is number 46. The other 45 completed diaries were under lock and key in the school's basement, or dungeon as Marty and Luther called it, awaiting a permanent shipping address. Grace's writing style had changed dramatically over the years. Her first few moleskins were filled with carefully recorded events in perfect detail, with dates, times, people, and places. Now the words flowed from her mind onto the paper like a roaring stream, with little regard for punctuation or content. You should use your gizmo to keep your diary, Marty suggested. Save a few trees. I didn't even bring the gizmo with me, Grace said, as she continued to write. I prefer using a real pen. Suit yourself. Marty pulled up a chair. You and PD seemed pretty tight. Not by choice, Grace said. At least not my choice. She won't leave me alone. Maybe you can work your way up to a real animal someday. Very funny, Grace said. But that was precisely why she was allowing PD to sit in her lap. Many of the fears on her list revolved around animals. She was not afraid of tiny poodles, but she thought that Spending time with PD might be a tiny step in the right direction. This is the only way to fly, isn't it? Marty continued. Phyllis is a hoot. Did you know that she flew a bomber in the Gulf War? And Phil flew bombers in Vietnam. You should hear some of their stories. And did you know Wolf is a pilot? He's flying the jet right this minute, while Phyllis gets some sleep. Grace sighed. When Marty wanted to have a conversation, there was virtually no way to avoid it. She put her pen and moleskin in her father's backpack. Using the backpack made her feel a little closer to her parents. Have you seen Laurel? She asked. Yeah, she's playing chess with one of the geeks, and I think she's winning. Grace sighed again. Is everything okay? Marty asked. Grace shrugged. I guess. You've been awfully quiet the last few days. What's unusual about that? Nothing. It's just, well, you know, Mom and Dad and everything's fine, Grace assured him. As good as can be expected. I haven't had a chance to thank you for trying to convince Wolf to take us with him, Marty said. It was nothing. Besides, it didn't do any good. It's the thought that counts. And that's what surprised me. I thought you were dead set against going to Lake Tele. I was. What changed your mind? That was one of the questions Grace had been mulling over the past few days. She still didn't have an answer. Would you believe I just wanted to do something you wanted to do for a change? Marty laughed. No. Well, it's true, Grace insisted. At least that's part of it. When I saw you lying on the shore, presumably dead, my first thought was, what's going to happen to me? It was such an ugly, selfish thought. I was ashamed of myself. I realized that when it comes to you and me, it's always me. Poor little frail Grace, afraid of everything. You're always trying to protect me. It's time I did something about that. You're not my knight in shining armor. You're my brother. Most of the time, Marty enjoyed being Grace's knight. More like tarnished armor, he said. What's the other part of it? The nightmare, Grace answered, and the feeling, almost a premonition, that the mystery of the nightmares lies somewhere in the Congo. We could tell Wolf about your premonition. Maybe that would be enough to make him change his mind. Grace shook her head. I think it's best to leave everything the way it is. Back at school, I'll have a chance to think things through a little more, and maybe figure out what's going on. Marty doubted it. Grace had always alternately fleeing from the nightmare and trying to remember what it was about her entire life, but he decided not to pursue the subject any further. He had adjusted to Wolf's plan. After 7 years at Omega Prep, he could certainly stand a few more weeks. He looked at his watch. We'd better check on the animals. Grace and PD followed him through several bulkhead doors to the cargo hold at the rear of the airplane. As soon as they got there, PD started running in circles and barking. I know how to stop that, Marty said confidently. He held his cargo pocket open and commanded in his best Travis Wolf voice, Snake. PD continued running in circles, barking, Snake. She slowed and eyed him suspiciously. Marty grabbed the tiny canine and stuffed her into his pocket. That's more like it. The trick looked a little more impressive when Wolf did it, Grace commented. The results are the same. Barely. Let's get this over with. I was in the middle of something important when you interrupted me. She walked over to Vid's cage and picked up an overturned food tray from the floor. Marty joined her. That's weird. What? The last time I was here, I left a pile of chopped fruit on that tray. Now it's all gone. He looked past Vid's cage to Bose. The chimp's door was wide open, and she was nowhere in sight. I didn't do it. Then who did? Grace asked, staring in horror at the open cage. Well, Marty looked at the padlock. I could have sworn I locked it last time I was in here. You let her out of her cage? Just for a few minutes. She was going crazy. How could you? It doesn't matter, Marty said. She's loose and we've got to get her back in the cage, or Wolf will never let me come back to Cryptos. Petey jumped out of his pocket and stared sniffing along the floor. She's on to something. Follow her. I'll close the cargo door. We don't want a Bo running amok in the main cabin. Marty, we should get help, Grace said. Don't worry, I can handle this. Grace wasn't so sure, but she didn't want to get Marty into trouble with their uncle. Reluctantly, she followed the mini bloodhound deeper into the cargo hold and watched in surprise as Petey disappeared through an open hatch in the floor. Marty came up behind his sister, very, very quietly. Boo. Grace nearly jumped out of her school uniform. Marty laughed. Payback for the library. That's not funny. Yes, it is. What are you doing? Petey jumped down this hatch. The opening was just big enough for a human to fit through, or a chimp. Marty got down on his knees and listened. He heard a faint hooting. Unless PD can imitate a chimpanzee, I'd say our fugitive is somewhere below. I'll get some fruit and see if I can't tempt her out. He headed to the galley, leaving Grace to guard the hatch. Grace did not like dark, confined spaces. In fact, they were number 39 on her list, which was why she was considering climbing down the hatch. I took them on one at a time, Laura had said. Chimpanzees were not on the list, but Bo was. Grace was convinced that Bo did not like her. Perhaps I can take on 2 fears at a time, she thought. Imitating Laurel, she closed her eyes and started taking deep, even breaths. While she imagined herself climbing down through the narrow opening into the darkness, her skin became clammy with perspiration. Her mouth turned to parchment. She felt her legs tremble. Go, she told herself. If you wait any longer, Marty will return and pop down that hole like a rabbit, and you'll have missed your chance to conquer number 39. She descended a short aluminum ladder and found herself in a compartment the size of a long closet, with very little headroom. Remarkably, it wasn't nearly as terrifying as her imagination had led her to believe. The warm air was thick, with the oily smell of fuel and machinery, which was far from pleasant, but if she concentrated on her breathing, She found she could endure the confinement. Bo was at the far end of the compartment, straddling a round cylinder, 8 or 9 feet long and at least 6 feet around, that appeared to be covered with some kind of mesh. She was holding Petey in the crook of her arm. "What are you doing, Bo?" Bo glanced up, gave Grace a quiet hoot, then went back to work. It looked like she was trying to unravel the mesh around the cylinder. "Are you there?" Marty called down the hole. He was wearing his father's backpack, which he had grabbed from the conference table to carry the bananas, apples, and pears. The camp stove and moleskin were in it, as well as the Frankenstein monkey. "Yes," Grace yelled, "and Bo's here too. Bring a flashlight." She scooted closer to the busy chimpanzee. Marty knew all about number 39, and he was shocked that his sister had gathered enough courage to climb through the hatch with the chimp below. He awkwardly made his way down the ladder with a small flashlight and crawled up behind her. "Did you fall down the hole?" "Very funny," Grace said. "Just asking." He shined the light past her and caught Bo in the beam. "What she's doing?" "I think she's trying to disassemble the airplane." "Perfect." "Hand me the bananas," Grace said. She pulled one off and started to peel it very slowly. Boy, do I love ripe bananas." So did Bo. She grabbed the whole bunch out of Grace's hands. "Hey, give those back." Grace made a lunge for the bananas, but Bo was too quick. She jumped backward out of reach. Petey barked. "Now what?" Marty asked, shining the flashlight on the munching chimpanzee. "I guess we'll just have to wait her out. She'll get hungry. Not with 6 pounds of bananas in her hands." "Good point. Maybe we can get them away from her." Grace crawled slowly toward her, with Marty right behind. Bo clutched the bananas to her chest. "I don't think this is going to..." A green light came on, followed by a loud alarm. "What is that?" "Uh-oh," Marty said. It's all automatic now. The computer calculates the airspeed, the size of the chute, altitude. I didn't do it." The floor beneath them disappeared. Free fall, 13. Falling 18,000 feet was not on Grace's list, but she fainted anyway. It wasn't on Marty's fear list either, but he would have put it on the list if he'd had one. As they dropped from the belly of the jet, he managed to hook one arm through the mesh and grab his limp sister with the other. Out of the corner of his rimmed blood vision, he saw something small and dark falling next to him. Petey's ears were standing straight up, and her little brown eyes were bulging out of her skull. The only way he could snag her was to free one of his hands. He looked up. The canister was dropping perpendicular like a bomb, and Bo was perched on the very top, baring his teeth in a frozen fear grimace. The mesh extended beyond the end of the canister, where Bo was sitting forming a shallow basket. If he could get Grace up there, she would be relatively safe for the time being. He managed to get her over his shoulder and climbed to the top. Once there, he found several straps securing the canister. He quickly loosened one of them and cinched it around her waist. He wasn't worried about Bo. She was holding the mesh so tightly it would take a jackhammer to loosen her fingers and toes. PD was another story. The little poodle was still hurtling toward Earth, an activity Marty was no stranger to. The summer before, his father had secretly taken him skydiving. "If you tell your mother about this, she will kill me," he had said. Marty told no one about their secret outing, including Luther and Grace. He had done well on the course he had taken prior to his jumps. He looked at the rapidly approaching ground, estimating they had fallen about 8 or 9,000 feet in a few seconds. A parachute would deploy. At least, he hoped it would deploy. He scrambled back down the side of the canister. PD had drifted out of easy reach. He hooked his feet into the mesh and leaned back with both arms outstretched. And to his delight, the canister inched towards the fallen canine. It took him 3 tries, but he finally managed to grab PD's leg and pulled her in. He stuffed her into his cargo pants, and he was climbing back up. He heard a loud pop. He braced himself. The parachute snapped open, jarring every bone in his body. He stared at the bright yellow canopy, billowing above Grace and Bo, thinking it was about the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. But he didn't have time to appreciate his good luck. Beneath them was a lush carpet of green trees that Marty knew would not feel like a carpet when they crashed through them. "Pick your landing spot with the utmost care," his instructor had said. "The ground is the only part of the fall that can kill you." There were several small lakes to the right. Marty didn't want to land in the water, but he figured it would be better than breaking through the tree limbs. He leaned out from the canister, and the parachute began to drift toward the largest of the lakes. Now all he had to do was wake Grace so she wouldn't drown when the canister hit the water and sank. He started back up to the top to do just that when a terrifying word popped into his mind. That word was crocodiles. A few months earlier, he and Luther had watched a documentary on the 14-foot-long carnivorous reptiles. With 160 sharp teeth, they store their victims underwater until the meat is soft enough for them to tear off and gulp down in chunks. The gnarly television host had commented, "Tenderize them in the sun till they're like butter, and the Congo is crawling with the big crocs." At the time, Marty would have given just about anything to see a living, breathing crocodile. Not anymore. The lake below looked like a pot of soup stock awaiting its main ingredients. 2 humans with a dash of chimp and a pinch of poodle, dropped in for flavor. Marty undid Grace's strap and shook her. "Wake up." She didn't move. Grace could swim like a fish. Without her, he wouldn't be able to help Bo and PD to shore. And if there were hungry crocodiles in the lake, "You gotta wake up," he slapped her. Her eyelids didn't even flicker. They were within seconds of splashing down. He grabbed her by the arm and was on the verge of jumping off when a gust of hot, humid air came out of nowhere, catching the chute and pushing the canister across the surface like a jet ski. "All the way to shore," Marty shouted, punching the air with both fists in encouragement. "Go, baby, go!" He probably should have been holding on, because 20 feet from shore the canister slammed into a submerged log. Marty was catapulted into the air and did 2 complete somersaults before doing a belly flop in the waist-deep brackish water. He got to his feet, coughing and spitting and scooping the mud out of his eyes, just in time to see the parachute drag the canister ashore. He was relieved to see Grace still attached. The canister lingered for a moment just above the ground, giving Bo a chance to jump off and disappear into the trees. "Wake up, Grace," Marty sputtered, watching in horror as a gust of wind started, lifting the canister straight up into the air. "No," he struggled forward, hindered by the ooze sucking at his sneakers. "Wake up! Jump!" Grace did not wake up, but a very large crocodile did. It slithered into the water, 50 yards to his right. As he stared in dismay at the flesh-gulping reptile, he felt something nibbling on his thigh and nearly fainted himself, until he remembered that crocodiles don't nibble. "PD!" He reached into his cargo pocket and pulled the gasping poodle out. "Geez, I'm really sorry. He looked back at the crocodile, which had alarmingly cut the distance between them, in its resting place in half. "We're out of here." They reached shore just ahead of the crocodile, but well behind the canister. It had disappeared above the tree canopy and headed east. Marty ran several dozen yards, stopping to catch his breath, then threw up.